Yes.
Okay, here we're starting.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on Automate Virtual Services Creation and Deployment. My name is Pamela Deason. I'm the DevOps Marketing Lead here at Broadcom. Today's presentation will be led by Beverly Mendel, Product Manager for SV, and she's also joined by Carl Miller, Client Services Consultant. Carl will be performing a live demo at the end. During the call, if you have questions, there's a tab on your screen where you can enter them. And at the end of the call, we'll be sure to review and answer all of your questions. So now I'm going to turn this over to Beverly to start the presentation. Take it away, Beverly. Thank you.
Thanks, Pam. Hi, everyone. Welcome for joining us. And we're going to just take a minute and talk about what is it we're going to talk about today. So the first thing is we really want to dig into the service virtualization APIs and how they can help when you're thinking about automating testing pipelines. So we'll talk about what are the APIs, what are the capabilities around the APIs, why do folks use the APIs, and what is it they're trying to solve, right? What are the challenges that they're now able to simplify by being able to build and create and deploy virtual services kind of automatically. Then I'll be handing it over to Carl, who's going to show you this live. And we're going to spend more time on the demos themselves, where we can actually see in action what is it you can accomplish by creating and deploying virtual services via the APIs, as well as the process of updating existing virtual services via the APIs. What are the use cases? Why would you want to do it? And how to think about that when automating a pipeline. And then lastly, we'll talk about the new features that are available in 10.7 and 10.7.2, and then have question and answer. And I do want to emphasize, if you're not on 10.7 or 10.7.2, there are APIs still available in 10.6 that can help you, but I'd strongly recommend that you look at getting upgraded. We'll mention this again, but 10.6 does go end of support March 2023. And I know that it can take some time to plan and coordinate the upgrade as well as to try out the new features. And so I strongly recommend that we figure out a plan to upgrade to 10.7.2 if you haven't already upgraded. So let's talk about the APIs further. So we introduced the the V3 APIs in our 10.5 virtual service. And basically, initially, one of the challenges that folks were trying to solve is they'd want to be able to create or update existing virtual services without necessarily going through our UI capabilities, such as our portal or our workstation. And the second piece was, they want to be able, as part of their testing pipeline, to make sure that they have the right virtual services to meet their needs, right? If I'm a developer and I'm at an earlier part of my testing cycle, I may have different tests, different test data, different use cases I'm trying to test, as opposed to if I were looking at integration testing or performance testing. My use cases, my scenarios might differ, and the behavior of the virtual service may differ. And so I want to make sure that I have the virtual services stood up that I need for the part of the testing that I'm at. And oftentimes, right, a system is not all available. And so it's important to keep virtual services logged in to help make sure that you can test fully end to end, whether it's because the systems are unavailable or too expensive, or you can't test the scenarios, right? It's hard to get data maybe that comes back out of order, some of the negative scenarios that you need to test in order to make sure that you have a successful deployment with, good quality. And so the solution was that we introduced the V3 API. And this really simplifies the ability to build and create virtual services. We'll talk more about what's in there. But previously, right, when you had APIs in service virtualization to build and create virtual services, you'd have to string together a number of different calls in order to build or create it. And V3, as you'll see today, is pretty simple. And you can do single calls to create or to update virtual services. So that's what we're going to go over. And we want to make sure that we're thinking about, when utilizing the APIs, really doing this in the DevOps pipeline, because the goal is you utilize a pipeline, right, to make sure your development process is really focused and organized. You can't manage things manually, or it's definitely time consuming if you try to manage things manually, because you might have different environments or different constraints in different parts of your pipeline. You might need different types of tests, as I mentioned. You want to make sure you can deploy on demand. And so I think everyone's kind of familiar with why you would use DevOps pipelines, as well as the flow, right? Starting from where, using a source control and using your code commits and being able to kind of automate the process of what you would need to pass or achieve from a testing standpoint in order to confirm that it's meeting the quality you would expect before moving on to the next environment. And so I think folks are familiar with DevOps pipelines. What's really important is to integrate service virtualization in that pipeline so that you can test faster with more quality. The idea is you want to make sure, for example, you could shift left if you think about performance testing, because you definitely in your earlier environments will not have a production-like environment, but virtual services can be used to stand up and can respond like live systems, slow or fast, with especially on a performance VSE, with the transaction per seconds that you would expect in a real environment. And you can shift that left. You can shift left building, the UI as well as the API pieces together by understanding what the contract is and creating a virtual service to represent that, so both teams can work in parallel. So being able to use service virtualization can really help. But we want to make, again, you don't want this all to be manual. So if you can integrate this with your pipeline at time of code commit, you may also have the contract, whether that's a specification or request response pairs of how it can behave. You can commit that into your source repository as well. You can make sure that upon you're committing to those types of changes, that you have the virtual service also brought up with the rest of the environment. So thinking about using service virtualization in the pipeline can really speed up your development process to make sure you're releasing more quickly with the quality that you need. That's the important point, that you're really testing end to end what you need. And so the APIs are a way to streamline that and simplify the building, creating, and deploying of those virtual services. So let's talk about what's in the V3 API. Now, one thing you'll notice, there are asterisks. When I do talk about the capabilities with asterisks, the reason those are there is those are only available in our 10.7, 10.7.2, or later, right? So if you are on 10.6, a lot of the capabilities are still there, but not all of them. And so let's talk about first what's in the V3 API. The first thing is the ability to actually create the virtual service. So we can take your specification file, like your WSDL, Swagger, VAML, VODL, and build a virtual service out of that. We can also build virtual services out of request response pairs. Or you can think about, hey, I may already have something that's very customized, like a VSI, VSM. I might store those assets rather than a MAR file. I'd like to be able to deploy that. That's capable with the V3 API. You're also able to specify information like your SSL connections and your port for deployment. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. The next capabilities are available in the latest version of the V3 API, which is the ability to specify dependent data. So for example, if you do have a VSI VSM, maybe you've made it data-driven and you've mapped it to an external data file. You can supply that data as well at the time that you are creating your virtual service. So if you're creating a pipeline, you can have that run as well as the dependent data. Additionally, for VSI VSM, you might have an active project config for anything that you've specified as a parameter. And you can provide or supply that as well when creating a virtual service so that it spins up on demand with what you need. Additionally, in 10.7.2 and beyond, right, we have added the ability, if you are, for example, storing RR pairs and you want to deploy those, you are able to provide things like the think time specification or the match tolerance via the sidecars. And we'll talk more about this at the end. But you're able to provide that. So if you need the virtual service to, for example, you're maybe testing a negative scenario, what happens if a dependent service is slow to respond? How does my application handle that? Or maybe you want to test something where it's more realistic, right? I know my real service is going to take between a specific SLA. I want to make sure that range is there for when I respond with the virtual service. It also responds in that same typical, what would this other service respond as? You can build that in as you're creating your virtual service. Now, once you have your virtual service, you have the ability to update that virtual service. So, for example, say you want to augment it with new RR pairs. Maybe there's something that has been changed in the contract. Maybe there's a new scenario that's been added, or maybe there's a new data that scenario that you need to test. Maybe you need a specific type of user that has a specific type of account, and you don't have that data scenario already in your virtual service. What you can do is you can actually update an existing running virtual service with new RR pairs. And if you're on the latest version, you can also update the match tolerance and the think time using those same sidecar files. Additionally, right, if you're on the latest version, if you have a data-driven virtual service running, say you have different types of data for different types of tasks, you can also use the V3 API to update the data on the fly as well. So as part of your pipeline, I may have run a certain set of tests against a virtual service that has a certain set of data, and I want to replace the CSV file that indicates the data scenarios for this new set of tasks. You'll be able to do that with a single API call. In addition, the V3 API also has the ability to download the MAR file of a running virtual service on the VSE. And then you can specify the configuration parameters. I know before I talked about providing kind of SSL information and port. You can also name the virtual service, provide a description, indicate the type and the base path and the data protocols. And so you can provide this kind of information in the configuration parameters. And we'll go into this in more detail when Carl kind of goes into the demo itself. The last thing I wanted to highlight, if you're not familiar with the V3 API, I do recommend taking a look at our documentation and especially looking at the Swagger documentation. So the default port, if it isn't changed, is 1505, right, wherever your registry is. And so you can take a look and actually try the capabilities out themselves directly in line and take a look at the V3 API. So I recommend checking that out. And with that, Carl, I'm going to hand it over to you so you can actually jump in with the demo.
Okay, great. So welcome, everyone. I'm Carl Miller, Client Services Consultant. I've got a lot of years development, architecture, and working with service virtualization. I actually bought it as a customer before I joined the company. So let's go right in and let's look at the demo, because I know that's always what I like to do. So in this demonstration, I'm going to show you how you can download a virtual service model archive file, otherwise known as MAR, how you can define SSL and other configuration parameters so that when you create a virtual service from, say, an RR pair or a Swagger, you can define it exactly as you need to, ports, SSL, etc. We're going to create a virtual service from a VSI, VSM, and config file. That's virtual service image and virtual service model files with the config. This gives you tremendous control over it. Then I'm going to create a virtual service from a Swagger, and then I'm going to update it with request response pairs, including think time. So we'll have that working. And if you have questions, please put them in the question panel, and they'll try to, one of my co-presenters will help me look at that because I'm going to be demonstrating, of course. So while I'm demonstrating, though, I'm going to use our digital bank demo application. This is a app server. I've got an app server and I've got dependent services. So I have virtual services for 3 of these. And we're going to use these, the ATM search and the Visa API as examples during this demonstration. So the first thing I want to show though is download a virtual service MAR file. And you can use this for lots of things. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay. There, we're sharing my screen now. So this is a virtual service environment I have up and running. I have multiple VSEs running here. I've got this Cars REST service running on here. And I'm going to switch over to the V3 API screen. This is what Beverly mentioned. This is a great way to learn about the APIs. First, we look at this. It's just going to retrieve all the data based on the VSEs. You click try it out. It's going active. This is a required as you have, and then you've got to sort by. You can limit the number that you have, and I'm going to execute this. Execute. There we go. You get a curl command. This is really useful for when you're building APIs, scripts, etc. And you can get the virtual total counts on that. So this document, then you can use this response in JSON. You can use to get information you need. If you wanted to, you actually could return it in XML, but I prefer JSON. It's a little more succinct. So I'm going to shrink that down, and then I'm going to retrieve a MAR file. So click try it out. I'm going to give this the VSE name, VSE-Team02. I recommend having a naming convention for your virtual service environments. Give each team one. Whatever naming convention you feel, it makes things a lot easier. Cars.rest. You can encode it in base 64. And if you do not, the response content type is important, because if you execute it with just application JSON, it's just going to give you the information. But if you change it to application zip, it will download a MAR file. And in the Swagger here, you're going to look at this. It's going to download the MAR. Let's see, I already have one there, so I'm going to delete that. And then I'm going to click download file. And there we go, Cars REST MAR file. So this allows you to get a MAR file from a virtual service if you have that, if you need that. Okay, and let's see. Okay, and it looks like we may have a question. One of the presenters, co-presenters, telling me I got a question. Why would you do this? Well, I actually had somebody ask me that the other day, because a customer was needing to migrate all their virtual services from on-premise to a cloud system, and they didn't want to do it manually because they had a whole bunch of them. So what we did was we looked, we said you can take these APIs, you can take all these APIs and you can create a pipeline on it. Let me see if I can find this. There it is. Migrate cloud to VSEs. So I created this pipeline. Oh, wrong one. Sorry. Last success. Migrate cloud to VSEs. There we go. And what this is it's a pretty simple pipeline. I built this to migrate from the cloud, and I'm using the V3 API. I parameterized it, original server name, server to get the virtual services from, destination server, VSE, and most importantly, I had a link to I have a list of the virtual services that I want to migrate, virtual services to migrate. So let's save that and go back. There we go. And I'm going to build this with parameters. And what I'm going to do on this is I'm going to migrate these two virtual services here from this this system, a VSE running on this system, and I'm going to migrate over to this VSE where I had my cars REST server. So when I go into my Jenkins, I could make changes with these parameterized build, because parameterized builds come in. Parameterized builds allow me to execute this as a REST call. And if I click build, this is going to get the list. All it does is get the list, executes that same command. So I'm executing those same two commands you saw. And going from this one here, if I refresh this over here now, I've got the first one, and there I've got the second one. I'm able to very quickly move virtual services from one to the other. And you can, if you have things built with configuration files for ports and such like, you can also alter the ports that they're running on. So if you're moving up to a cloud and you want to restrict a port range, you could actually migrate your virtual services up and assign new ports at the same time.
And Carl, so one of the questions that was asked was, can you download all the MAR files in a VSC in one go? And so I do want to make sure we kind of cover that, right? So one of the things that you can do when you get back, what's running on the VSC is you can then you can kind of script through it, right? So that it would go kind of down the list so that it can download each of those, right? So
yes,
and you can utilize, whether it's a pipeline or scripting or even app tests to be able to accomplish or achieve that. But yes, right, it is possible to then automate that. So I just wanted to make sure that we covered that question. Someone also asked.
All I did was I downloaded the list. And what I did here was I downloaded the list of all the virtual services and all the VSEs, but I only selected the specific ones I had in my list file. However, you could modify that script that I wrote in Jenkins. It was a Groovy script, or you could use any scripting language. I could have modified it to just say, download it and push it up to the cloud. So yes, it's easy to do in one go. It's just a little bit of scripting.
And someone also asked if we could, if we're going to be using SOAP at all for the API demo. And so I don't know if your examples include SOAP, Carl, but maybe you can answer that. If they don't, though, this will work with SOAP as well.
Yes, it will work with SOAP, but I know I'm demonstrating REST pretty much today.
Okay. And I hope that answers your question. So what we're showing will work with SOAP, but it is not in today's demo.
Because if you look at our documentation, a SOAP is one of the DPHs, data protocol handlers, that we do use. So that's showing how we can migrate. Now I'm going to go into showing you how we can do the create the virtual services. We've done a get. Now we're going to do a create a virtual service. And this is where we get into some more advanced stuff. And if you'll notice here in the documentation, we do have some advanced, it says for advanced uses, check out the documentation. This is an example. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to create a virtual service from request response pairs. So click try it out. Go in here, type in my VSE name. And as I said, the Swagger is really nice for learning how to do this, but I pretty much script everything because I'm that type of a person. So now I'm going to come in here, and here is a configuration that I have for this RR pairs. I'm going to be creating an ATM search from RR pairs. I've got my description here. I've given it a capacity of 1, a think scale of 99. It is going to start on deploy. I've given it a group tag. I'm using HTTP. I am using SSL. I've told it to deploy on port 8101. I've given it an SSL configuration. Now, if I was doing this in a pipeline or something, obviously I'd be bringing in a token for my passwords, so they wouldn't be in plain text. So I'm just going to copy this here, go back to my Swagger interface here, paste that in, and I've told it that the data protocol will be REST. So should we deploy this to the VSE? Yes, or true. And then my file I'm going to choose. I'm going to go into my digital bank, and I'm going to go in and grab my ATM search zip file. Click open. There we go. We've got that. And what that looks like here is in my installs in my digital bank. If we look at that ATM search zip, I've got 3 sets of request response pairs, and I got this meta response properties. That's one of the sidecar files that Beverly mentioned. And if I open up Notepad++ again, you're able to see, so here is ATM search 0 results request. It's just a get call with a certain zip code. The response is a JSON array that has nothing in it. Positive looks like this with a different zip code. Positive results is a JSON array of ATM locations. And then I have one for not available that's going to actually return a 404 error. So I've satisfied my happy path, my negative test case, and an error test case by those. And then my meta response properties is I'm giving this a realistic think time. This is, so it's very realistic, of between 150 to 275, which means the virtual service will randomly respond in between those think times. So what we'll do is we'll click execute on this. There we go. There's the curl command. And as I've said, you can use these curl commands to create your pipelines. That's what I do. We got the response body that you could get back. It will tell you what this is, what the service name is. It says it's running. It's on 8101. It's HTTPS. If you do not assign it a port, it will respond with an auto-assigned port. And you could get this back, so you could use this for tests later on. So if we look in here, we will see that it is now running ATM search RR. So we've got on 8101, And if we run a test against it, we're going to see. So, and if we look at this, we'll see we're getting a happy path. The request response pairs, it's coming back. My empty came back with an empty. And my last one coming back with a 404, the response code was 404. So very easily, I'm able to, using request response pairs, I'm able to create a virtual service, throw it out there, ask the team that will be consuming that service, say I'm developing the service, I could create a virtual service representing the design, push it out there, ask the teams that will be consuming that service, does this meet your specifications? Is this what you need? If they say no, I can modify the request response pairs very, very quickly, put it back up, and get that confirmation that we're on the right track while we're in development stage. I do not have to, they don't have to wait till I'm finished to ask for changes. So,
Carl, we do have one question that came in as well. So asking about V3 API for creating virtual services and asking if it supports, JMS or MQ. And so we do have, right, if you have a fully formed MAR, you can use like our V2, the Lisa invoke to deploy it. So you can still automate deployment. But obviously with messaging, there's some more complexity related to kind of the proxy queues and other information you would need to include. So that is not currently available unless it has already been like formed out as a, like a fully formed MAR, right? You're not able to do it from request response pairs. That said, if there's more details you'd like to share around your use case or the challenges, you're welcome to contact me. So beverly.mindle@broadcom.com. I'd love to hear from you and learn more about that use case.
Yep. Great. Cool. So that's how we would do a request response pairs. We did, you used to be able to, you can, I believe, create services using request response pairs in the workstation, but you need a very complex sidecar file. It's just kind of easier to create that virtual service and create that virtual service and then modify it with the configuration files. So create it and then modify the config file to do the deployments. So let's look at creating a virtual service out of IVSM. And what we're going to do on that is we're going to basically do exactly what we did before with this, only we're going to change it up to use a VSM and VSI. This allows you to have complex virtual services, but you can change out the VSI file. So for example, I could have a virtual service. It could be very complex if needed. And it could be very complex virtual service, and I can have a VSI, say, for a essential regression test. I used to call it a smoke test. That critical functionality that I need to have. Or I could have a VSI file with new functionality that component needs to get data for to test new functionality. And then I could have, say, a full regression suite, maybe for performance testing. So with this, you can change out different VSM, VSI files. So it's basically the same. I'm going to use, look at this VSE. I've got my same VSE, but for my configuration, I'm going to choose a different configuration here. I'm going to go to this one, visa transfer config. Copy this, go in here and paste this in. And with this one, it's going to basically be the same. I've given a different name to it, of course. Demo application VS transfer from VSM VSI, ThinkScale 98, just to show it's being run. I'm putting on port 8181. Use SSL false this time. And then I go down and I'm going to choose a file. In this case, the first one. I'm going to go into, I'm going to use the VSM. I'm going to choose the VSI for the next one. And then this is very important for these. You do need a configuration file. You do need a configuration file for this. So here we go. We've got the project config, the VSM, the VSI, and we can execute this. There we go. And then once again, here's the curl command that you can see. We got a 200. And if we go back in here and refresh this, as you can see, I now have a demo visa transfer on 8181. Now the key on these is if this VSM, VSI, like this one here, I actually have this virtual service is a property. It has a virtual service property as a port. So in that case, I need to actually have that config file. I need to actually have that config file, have it, and in here I've got the port in here, and I've got anything else I need in there to set that configuration. So with that, that's basically the way you do this. As you can see, we're able to do that pretty quickly. Push this out. I'm going to hold this off to just banks and just virtual services. So I've got these two here. So these are ones. But now what can you really do with this? And why is this important? So the reason this is really important is that you're able to work this. And I'm going to go back to slides real quick. Slides is because to me, this is what's really important. And let me just build this one out. Is you've got to work for like quick ones, like I did the request response pairs there. I did those in that part of your CI process. Lightweight virtual services in your CI process, request response pairs while I'm designing, developing, and all that. But then in your CD process, when you're moving through your environment, your continuous deployment process, you may want to use more progressively realistic virtual services. You may want to use different virtual service in different environments. And so you're able to, using the tools like I'm showing with the VSM, VSI, switching out the VSI file, you can have different virtual services or the same virtual service with different data in different environments. So let's see what that looks like. I go back to my sharing screen. Share. There we go. And what we're going to look at now is a different Jenkins pipeline where I'm showing how you can automate this entire process using these same APIs, using those APIs I'm showing. So what I have here is a Jenkins pipeline where I'm going to retrieve files. I'm going to go to my source repository. In my case, I'm using GitHub. I'm going to pull down my VSM VSI file, some config files. I could do RR pairs. I could do Swagger if I wanted. I'm going to look at the virtual service environment that's been specified in my configuration. And if anything's running in there, I'm going to undeploy it. I'm then going to deploy environment virtual services, because what really you're doing right here is you're completing a complete test environment in code. I'm for my system, I'm actually creating a virtual service environment in code with this. I'm then going to deploy the virtual service VSM VSI file, because I'm working on the part of my application that deals with the visa transfer that we just saw. I'm going to run a functional test. After I've got after test wait time, just so it doesn't run so fast I can't explain what's happening. I'm then undeploying that virtual service. I'm going to confirm my functional test passed. I'm going to deploy my environment virtual service to the performance VSE. I'm switching VSEs, going from a functional environment to a performance environment. I'm going to update the virtual service with a different VSI file for my performance test, with the data I need for my performance test. I'm going to run performance and concurrency tests, and I'm going to undeploy my virtual services. So we're actually going to be, let's see, it's that one. Don't need that one anymore. So I'm actually going to be, I've got these here. I'm going to deploy out to this system right here first, and then I'm going to run, and then I'm going to deploy it out to this one, my performance VSE, which currently has nothing running on it. Let's take off that auto refresh. So we'll be able to move that, and I'm going to use both virtual service environments. And the key thing on this is this code, as I showed you, you have those curl commands. I've got curl commands in there using the APIs. And here's where I'm actually deploying out that virtual service VSM, VSI files. I've told it what my dev test server is, what my port is. I'm using the V3 API. I've told it which VSE server I'm using, and I've given it the services. And then as we scroll over here, I've got my authorization. It's plugged in there. I've got a VSM file for my input file 1, input file 2. I got my VSI, and then I've got my config, JSON config, and then I've got my config file. Same exact command that I showed you in the Swagger is just being done in a script here. And you could do multiples if you needed to. So let's go execute this. Once again, I'm an old coder, so I parameterize everything. So I've got my server, I got my VSE server, I got my performance VSE, I got my service name, configs. I got a config JSON, I've got a performance config JSON where I give it an updated capacity, and I've taken the think scale down to 50. Actually, I think I'll take it down to 20 on this. And then I'm going to click build. So what this is going to do is actually run my job. Responding just a tiny bit slow for a demo mode. But there we go. It's kicking it off. It's pulled down all the data I need. It's now getting into my virtual service and looking at it. There we go. And it's first going to deploy everything here. Let me just take this down to bank. There we go. If we come back over to here, it's now deploying some environment services. Refresh that. There we go. It's starting to run the functional test. And there we've got transactions on the ATM search and the Visa transfer, because the Visa transfer is what I'm really concerned about. And now it's already starting to get rid of those virtual services. Last one it's going to take is the ATM search. There it goes. It's undeployed it. So now I've taken it out of my functional environment. I'm confirming that my functional tests worked. I'm now deploying to my performance VSE. So if we run over here to performance VSE and refresh this, there we go. It's got that one running. Got that one running. And now I'm deploying the updated virtual service. So this is going to be my Visa transfer ready for performance testing. The one that's ready for performance testing. And so when we go in here and we look at this, so it's got a capacity 3, think time of 20. It's enabled. And now I'm into my performance testing. Got a bunch of transactions running through here. There we go. And once that passes, I'm going to simply undeploy the required virtual services so that I can do those. And if we look in here and refresh, they're all gone or almost gone. So that's what we're talking about. You can use these APIs to very easily push what you need for testing within there, in there. And the last thing we need to show is how you can create a virtual service from a Swagger specification and then update it. So in this case, it's basically the similar thing, creating a virtual service. I'm just going to use a different, I'm going to use the same VSE. I'm going to give it a configuration that I need. In this case, I'm going to use a counts. I'm going to do a counts config, a slightly different one. Did I get that all? Yep. Okay. Yeah, I got that. And then, sorry, wrong one. We go. I'm going to deploy it to the system, and I'm going to choose a file, and this is going to be a Swagger. This is going to be a Swagger file. Counts JSON, open. So it's just a regular Swagger file. And we're going to execute. There we have a virtual service up here. Let's refresh. Type the wrong one in. Oh, I know
Hey,
why.
Carl, are you
I've got that.
filtered by the
I've got
view?
that
Yep.
filter. Yeah. So there it is. Demo accounts. Thank you, Beverly. It's like, I know it's there. The only thing about this is if you actually test this, if you actually run a test against this, the problem with Swagger is you don't get, it says it failed. Actually, the first one passed, but the thing is you just get, because Swagger doesn't have the real data you need. So what we need to do is go back and update this virtual service with request response pairs. And that's the last of the APIs we have. So this one, we're going to now update this with request response pairs so that we can use it, so we can make it more advanced and use it. So what I'm going to do is go back and get some request response pairs. There we go. Bring this down just a little bit, click try it out, type in the VSE name. Virtual service name to use. And this is actually okay right now because this is to update it, transport protocol, override transactions true. I do want to deploy it. I'm going to choose a file. And in this, I'm going to choose accounts zip. This is going to be real similar to what we've seen before. So if we look in here, demo accounts, account zip, I've got some happy path, negative error path, and I've got my meta response properties again. So I have my appropriate think time, and I'm going to execute. There's your curl command, there's your response body. And so I've updated that virtual service. I've updated that virtual service. Come on, click. There we go. It's running now. It's got 0 transactions. But if I go over here and run this test again, it's running this time. But if we refresh it, you can see we've managed to do everything we needed to. We've got all the error codes. We able to check an error. In this case, it was a 5.1, no such account, and the happy path. So you're able to update a virtual service with the required information to pass the test. So if you've got new tests and you need the virtual service to have data so that your application can pass that test, doing test-driven development works great. Using these APIs, you're able to automate this in pipelines such as I showed with my Jenkins pipelines, and automate things like a full CI/CD pipeline, or automate moving to the cloud. So do we have any questions?
We do, Carl. When you were going over with the VSI VSM, they were asking, there's a question about kind of what the parameter file, like what kind of things you could pass. You sort of briefly covered some of the things when you were showing what you parameterize, but can you just take one more minute and then to answer that?
Sure. The parameters you can pass into a Jenkins pipeline.
This is with the RR pairs, right?
Oh, with the RR pairs. Yeah. What you can pass in, so with the RR pairs, so let me go back to this. with the RR pairs, so the ATM, that's the configuration file in the, and that's the JSON that fits into the JSON that fits in up here is this one right here. Creation from one pair. So as you can see, it's got these things. It's got a whole bunch of stuff, and mine actually has a bit more than this here. You can put in what the base path is, a host header pass through. You can pretty much tell it almost anything you need. What I passed in was the name, the description of what my capacity wanted to be. If I was taking it to a performance VSC, it could be 2 or 3. I can do the think scale. I could tell it to start on deploy or not, because I could actually have it out there not be started. And then in my transport protocol, I can tell if I want it to have a base path. A lot of teams do use base paths. I can tell it to use SSL. I can tell it what port, the SSL configuration. And in the data protocol, if you're using our latest 10.7.2 and you get a patch, we can actually have multiple data protocols. One other customer is using SOAP and SOAP headers as the DPH. So there's multiple data protocols in there.
Yeah, thank you, Carl. Yeah, I appreciate you taking time to answer that. I'm going to continue on if that's all right.
Sure.
Okay, let me go back to the deck. And I just want to take a minute to kind of share some of those features. We kind of highlighted some of the capabilities you can do in the V3 API. I'll go through this quickly because I think Carl went through this in his demo, right? But if you've got a VSI VSM that uses an active project configuration, or if it's data-driven, right, and you've already mapped it, you can supply those data files. You can also, if you're updating an existing virtual service, can also, you can update that information as well. So if you have new data to drive your tests, right, you have different tests may require different scenarios or different, data to support it. You can have the correct or associated information and are able to utilize the pipeline like Carl showed, but also provide these assets. Additionally, right, Carl went through things like the think time specification, how to provide that in the sidecar with both this, you have a specific, I want to update a specific transaction, or a global where the specific one takes precedence. And the same thing would work again if you were doing the match tolerance. Now, you would want to be careful. First of all, if no match tolerance is provided, we assume it's exact. Most of the time, you'll probably want to create it with exact and then update it because we are creating the meta transaction at the same time. And so you don't necessarily want to change that to being a lower one. So it's probably most useful when updating transactions in a virtual service. Carl also brought up that there is a patch available on top of 10.7.2 to be able to specify multiple DPHs, including the SOAP header. And so we've added the ability to specify SOAP header as in addition to what we already supported with SOAP DPH and the ability to specify both. And so just like the workstation, right, the order does matter, the expectation of how you expect the transaction to work. You would order it accordingly, whether it should be headers and then body or body and then headers, you would order it when specifying, again, this is the configuration, right, the object configuration in the API, we would specify in the data protocol that you would be using multiple, DPHs, right? And so now we do have that ability to support multiple DPHs. I do want to highlight as well that we do have other webcasts. So next month, we actually are going to be talking more in depth around data-driven virtual services. So you can learn more about those capabilities. So please join us. We'd love to see you attend. I do also want to highlight we have an upgrade weekend coming up. This is great if you are still on 10.6 or on an older version. As I mentioned earlier, 10.6 does go end of support March 2023. We have dates November 5th and February 4th. where if you are ready, right, you've already kind of tested in a sandbox, and support will be there to help you make sure you're ready, that you can actually upgrade on the weekends, which will be staffed with our support team to be able to help you. So obviously a severity 1, you can call in anytime, but if you got a severity, lower severity, you might have to wait. And this would allow you to be able to get support on anything at that time. So we strongly recommend you check out our weekends. And if you'd like to learn more, sign up. We'd love to talk to you about that. We also have monthly office hours. It's a great opportunity. We like to demo new capabilities as well as talk about anything that's top of mind for our customers, any challenge they're trying to solve or anything that they'd like to prepare for, right? So we recommend if you are interested, you can join our office hours. It's the second Tuesday of each month. And I realize that we're a little bit over, but if anyone has any questions, feel free to enter them in the chat. I do see one question about the upgrade weekend asking, is there a kind of a fee for it? And there is not a fee for it. It is free. So if you're interested in attending the upgrade weekend, right, it's at no charge. And basically, I believe it's, the times escape me, I think it might be 8 to 5 or 8 to 6 AM to PM North America times. What we'll have is it will be staffed so that if you have any issues or cases, you can contact. Additionally, the support team will have also reviewed your upgrade plan, helped you work through any of the things that you need to consider so that you would have a smooth upgrade experience. We'll stay on for a minute or so more in case there are any other questions. I know it looks like there's a question as well. I know about kind of using virtual services on platforms other than the cloud. And so yes, right, you can, depending on where your VSC is located, right, you're able to deploy to that VSC. One of the advantages with cloud is that you can deploy and undeploy kind of on demand. And you can also think about, and Carl had a great webcast about ephemeral environments. You can actually spin up the VSC you need at the time of testing and spin it back down. So it is not required to be in the cloud. You can, have the VSC running wherever you need it to be. But it is an option to deploy it where you need it to be. All right, I don't see any additional questions. So Pam, I'm gonna bring it back to you.
Okay, again, we just want to, in closing, say thank you very much for joining. And as Beverly pointed out, office hours are coming up. So if you want to engage with Beverly, do that during office hours. We highly encourage that. We want your participation and communication. So thank you again for joining and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.